Hello, everybody. Happy summer. I submitted my grades the other day, and I think Adam did as well, or he's been off for over a week now.
I'm way ahead of you.
Yeah, he's been doing all sorts of stuff like roof construction in lovely Ohio. But
That's
yeah, I've been frolicking at the pool and the beach, more fun. So we are back with a wonderful episode. It's just the two of us solo here, and I hope you'll stick with us. Our episodes will probably be more sporadic throughout the summer, but we do plan on recording as many as we can. And this is a semi-emergency episode because there's been two outrageous pieces in the media by two very familiar characters over the past week. The first one, which we were going to discuss in this Envision podcast, was by Professor Joshua Shanes of Charleston, who I will now define as a wokeadox, someone who thinks they're
a new word.
an Orthodox Jew. You like the term?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Someone who is a sanctimonious Orthodox Jew, but is also, a militant anti-Zionist. So wokeadox, I think that works. In fact, I'm thinking of writing a novel with that title. So Joshua Shanes, Schmegegge, they're the wokeadoxers, doxized orthodoxist. Wokeadoxist.
What about ortho woke?
No, I think wokeadox is much better.
All right.
Yeah. Ortho woke. That sounds like a doctor you go to for after like knee surgery or something.
Yeah, well, but it makes sense though, at least because you can because it's ortho is the proper prefix for that.
Or it sounds like someone you go for braces. Well, no, wokeadox is good because it sort of encapsulates, it has the word paradox in there too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And isn't there a term conservadox for people who are like halfway between conservative Judaism and orthodoxy?
I know that it was for a while, and now people kind of eschew the term.
It was a box to check off on J-dates about 25 years ago. I can tell you that much.
Yeah.
But I haven't, checked lately. So, all right. Well, the other piece, which we're going to start with, and it supersedes Professor Shanes very much, is by our favorite Schmegegge of the year, who has certainly been upgraded to Schmendrick Plus. Especially.
Get to that. Didn't we have an absurd comment from one of our previous videos? Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, they were making fun of us for only having 400 views or something.
Yeah, only 400 views. That was one of our most, it was like our third or fourth most popular episode, and they're making fun of us.
Yeah, and they said it was pathetic.
And that person had approximately zero followers.
None whatsoever.
None whatsoever. No.
What was her name? Martha?
Something like that. Martha. Did you know who this was?
No, I just assume she's the Martha from the Beatles song. Martha, my dear.
It's possible. Yeah.
You have spent your days in conversation, please. Be good to me, Martha, my love. Well, she hasn't been good to us. So screw her. All right, so I mixed a double of whiskey sour with some amaretto and maraschino cherry and some cherry whiskey in it because, this piece that Omer Bartov has written is way off the charts. A friend of ours mentioned to me after I showed it to him some of the outrageous remarks in it. He said he thinks he's on the payroll of some foreign government. He can't imagine how one of the leading scholars of genocide in this country could actually write this drivel. And it's beyond drivel, far worse than the J. Peterman catalog, a million times over. So Bartov, and I'll turn on screen share in a second, he wrote an essay about anti-Semitism. So I would like to point out, and this was my original problem here, that just because you're an expert on the Holocaust, Nazis, and World War II, which Bartov very much is, and genocide perhaps in general, he's obviously made forays into that, though obviously his mischaracterization of Israel suggests he doesn't know much, really. But that doesn't make you an expert on anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has a very long history, and in many respects, the Holocaust was atypical because it was the only instance of anti-Semitism that led to an attempt to mass exterminate the Jewish people. I would say that Soviet anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism is far more typical of what we've had, at least in modernity. And the Middle Ages, of course, is something else entirely. In any case, I was going to go off on a rant on that part alone, and then I decided to read the piece, and I couldn't believe it. It wasn't just an overview of anti-Semitism. It was his big theory of the Jews as a people with a homeland who went into exile and then got a homeland again. The type of question you'd give some graduate students on a comprehensive exam, and these students would get an F if they turned in a response like this. So I got some screenshots and I want to go through them. And the big problem with it's not even the anti-Semitic, though that is a problem too, but just this whole characterization of so much about the Jewish people and what Israel currently represents. But some of the stuff he says about Jewish antiquity is way off the charts as well. So I will turn on screen share. We will discuss that for a little while, and then we'll get to Wokedocs Professor Dr. Shanes after that. So let me find the screen share button.
Wait a minute, is Omer Bartov Wokedocs?
No, I don't think he's not religious.
No, I don't think so.
Near as I can tell, I can't speak.
No. No.
All right, I will turn on screen number 3 and let's share. All right, there. Do you see everything?
Yeah. Now remember, this is the Schmegegge of the year from 2023.
Yeah, Schmegegge of the year, who I dare say is much more than a Schmegegge. Oh no, I just lost myself. I lost myself. Oh, there I am. I'm back. Okay.
Yeah. Well, he's trying to earn back the title again this year as Schmegegge of the year. So
yeah,
he's written this piece in The Nation.
Yeah, but before I put up that, here is something that he did last week. I just thought I'd share with you all. He was giving a presentation in Turkish. Yeah, I don't speak to Adam. How's your Turkish? Can you read this?
I don't speak Turkish.
Okay, I get the word Palestine over here with Philistine there, but that's about it. So I don't know why the Turks want to listen to him. Perhaps he's offered to help them revive the Ottoman Empire and help them reconquer Ottoman Palestine. Maybe that's his next project on the agenda.
Possible.
It makes sense from a Turkish perspective, and they found some Yold in the American Academy who's willing to go along with it. All right, so back to the Bartov piece here. Anti-Semitism then and now, a guide for the perplexed. Okay, talk about, first of all, as pathetic and unoriginal title as you can come up with. Everybody knows, you know what the Guide to the Perplexed is, I'm assuming?
Maimonides book.
Yeah, it's Maimonides' most famous book, and as I tell my students, if you try to read it, you'll still be perplexed afterwards.
And there are so, it's a trite thing to do because there's a lot of articles and op-eds that use that in their headline.
Yeah, I would have just called it A Guide to the Verklempt. I mean, that's a much better title and a rhyme.
I think that's been used before too.
Has it? But I just came up with that on the spur of the moment. You see how little thought this requires?
I've seen that, yeah.
So you've seen A Guide to the Verklempt, really? I'll have to
Yeah.
look that up after. What does verklempt mean exactly?
You know, confused, something like that.
Okay, well, it works for this title, and it's a good term. All right, way to go, Bartov. Way to know your Yiddish. Okay, so here we go. All right, so as I suggested, it's a big overview of Jewish history and what went wrong with the Jews in antiquity. And clearly, for those of you who don't know, long story short, after the Jews returned from the Babylonian exile in the 500s BC, they were allowed to rebuild the temple, and they remained a province in successive empires. First, it was the Persian, then it was the Greeks, and then it was the Romans. Now, they launched mass rebellions under both the Greeks and the Romans. The Greek rebellion leading to the holiday of Hanukkah. We all know the story. I don't have to go into that. And the Roman rebellion was the Great Revolt, where they burned the temple to the ground. Masada happened, you know, the last great stand. I have a picture from his op-ed of Masada as well. And then it led to the era of exile. So,
by the way, you know, when I glanced at this, I thought it said gefilte fish.
Where it said what? It said,
I thought it said what they perceived
as
as
Gentile Filth.
gefilte fish. That's what I thought it said. Then I looked closer and I saw it said Gentile filth.
Well, I have written a letter of recommendation for a student. Instead of a program, I said, I highly recommend him for your pogrom. I have, my ex-wife caught that. I actually wrote that. Yeah, it's a true story.
No.
And yesterday I was reading something and I read the word crouch as crotch. So yeah, I'm having trouble reading too. All right, and something else of that vein for a word later in the paragraph. I don't remember what. So, okay, I want to read this. This is about the Hanukkah rebellion, the Maccabees. Under Greek rule, Jewish elites were increasingly Hellenized. That means adapting to Greek culture. Totally true. But as tradition has it, in 166 BCE, the Maccabees rebelled against foreign rule, clearing the temple of what they perceived as Gentile filth.
Not gefilte fish.
Not gefilte fish, Gentile fish. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gentile
filth.
Yeah, okay. What's wrong with this statement?
Well, you tell me what you think is wrong with it.
Okay, well, what really happened as per the story of Hanukkah that he would be referring to here?
Well,
I'm assuming you learned this in kindergarten. Come on. They threw out the Greeks, and then,
I'm not sure what you're referring to here.
well, how many candles are there in a menorah?
Well, there's 8, right?
Because
the oil lasted 8 days when it should have.
yeah.
It should have lasted a lot shorter amount of time.
And why didn't they have more oil? What was the issue?
Because it was tainted.
Tainted. So the temple was polluted. It was polluted because the Greeks took it over. They erected Greek gods. They demanded Greek sacrifices, i.e., they Hellenized the temple. And obviously that went too far for the Jews. They banned Judaism basically, and as the story goes, the oil was contaminated, and they only had enough oil because a menorah, the 7-branch candelabra, always has to be lit at the temple, and they only had enough to burn for one night, and there was a miracle, and it lasted for 8 days. So the Gefilte, the Gentile filth he's referring to here is referring to
fish too. You keep saying it.
I know. You've poisoned
now
me.
You're not going to get it out.
The Gentile filth he is referring to is the de-Hellenization of the temple, removing what is foreign culture and pollutants according to Judaism in terms of ritual purity laws in the most sacred space in Judaism. And he's referring to it as Gentile filth. Now, when I read that, this sounds like something David Duke would say, because he said, this is what the Jews mean about chosenness. They think they're better than everyone. And they're all, the goyim stuff is all filth, it's all trash. And that's why they keep to themselves and it's insular. So it's almost as if he's removing the sacred element of Judaism here, right? It's like, my friend who couldn't believe this grew up in Russia and is an expert in the Soviet Union, and he said this sounds like Soviet propaganda, because in the USSR they would have seen this through the lens of class conflict, and it's the insular nationalist Jews getting rid of those dirty foreigners out of it, totally stripping it of its historical and theological meaning.
But they were trying to protect their own kingdom from outside invaders, right? And
yeah, of course, there's no question about it. And he's not even going there. He's just talking about how what the Jews were doing in the temple constitutes insular fanatical nationalism of the sort that you would find in Israel today. He's constructing a narrative here showing how
regard them really as Gentile filth. I mean, there was no, where is it on record that they thought of these people as Gentile filth?
Well, if you read Judaic ritual purity laws in the Talmud or anywhere else, you can't have foreign cultures tainting the temple. I mean, just in terms of kashrut and circumcision, in terms of the erection of foreign statues, in terms of having to perform sacrifices on behalf of Antiochus or whoever else. I mean, yeah, it's considered filth because it's not ritually pure for Judaism. So the antithesis of that is of course filth.
All right.
But that's the point. He's calling it filth, and he's using this harsh terminology without giving its theological significance its due, what it's due for. It's absurd.
But there's no theology here.
He removes it. There is theology, and he's decided not to put it in.
Right. Yes. I don't understand. That's the part I have that I'm confused about when you first asked me what's the problem here, because I'm reading this as a political history rather than something that's rooted in Jewish theology.
That's it. It's a political history that's ahistorical because it's not viewing things through the proper lens of its time period, which as a historian, Omer Bartov knows that you need to do that. But instead, like Marxists who want to talk about the proletarian Jews rising up against the Greek bourgeoisie, an absurd construct, he's projecting contemporary shit onto the past because he needs to draw a straight line from these Messianic Jews in antiquity to the Messianic Jews in Israel today who are, committing genocide against the Palestinians. That's his purpose here. Okay, and I'll show you that with one of the later slides.
This sentence would have made more sense if he had said gefilte fish.
Yeah, it would have been a little bit better. Yeah, it would have been more like a Monty Python movie, perhaps, or Mel Brooks.
By the way, shout out to Batamti Mustard. Goes great on gefilte fish.
All right, good to know. I hate gefilte fish. I only like the Chabad rabbi here's wife's gefilte fish because she's Sephardic, so she makes it spicy. But otherwise, I won't touch the shit. All right, image number 2 here. All right, this is a familiar thing. When he's talking about, and he's going on about the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which of course all the wokeadox people and everyone on the left rejects because it does discuss when anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And obviously, they have a problem with that. They have a problem with the very idea that anti-Zionism can be anti-Semitism. And then at the end, he said, this is tantamount to saying that hundreds of thousands of anti-Zionist Orthodox Haredim around the world, including some in Israel's own government, are also anti-Semitic. Okay? That's the gotcha that people like Shaul Magid pull out of their hats all the time. They say, you calling the Satmar Rebbe an anti-Semite? Are you really doing that? So he's doing the same thing. That's another strategy he has with this particular line.
Jonathan Karp, who we will have on next week, make the same case, though, that we can't label such people anti-Semitic if they're Jewish and obviously are not anti-Jewish.
No, but he would also
Jewish on their sleeves. Like, how do you look at a rabbi with a long beard and payas and think that this is an anti-Semite?
Well, that's an important discussion, and we have an episode about that coming up. But I don't think that Omer Bartov would recognize anti-Israelism as a form of racism, as our next guest does. He would
right. That would be the difference for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I wouldn't call the Haredim. I think Jews can be anti-Semites, but I'm not going to call the Haredim anti-Semites. They're sticking to a theology that they stuck with for 2,000 years. Okay, so they're tenacious little monkeys, as Kramer would say. So yeah, no, but that's a stupid gotcha that really means nothing. It's Shaul Magid always says, look at Martin Buber. You going to call him an anti-Semite too? Ahistorical. Yes, what Martin Buber. This is what happens when I pour a double drink. What Martin Buber considered to be Zionism or considered Zionism in the 1920s would be considered anti-Semitic today. Absolutely.
Why is he saying ultra-Orthodox Haredim? Isn't that redundant?
Well, I don't know. I've never gotten a straight answer on what Haredim are exactly because it's an Israeli construct. And
well, mainstream Orthodox Jews will often refer to themselves as Haredim, but when you think of Haredim, because it literally means ones who tremble.
Yeah.
If you think of if you think of the label of a Haredim, that just simply means a particular group of Hasidic Jews in Israel.
No, because they're not all Hasids. It's actually a more expansive category than ultra-Orthodox. Okay. In the West, we use the word ultra-Orthodox to mean Hasids. Whether that's accurate or not, that's been the
Well, they do this in Israel also, in the English language media. They tend to do that.
Okay, but there are a lot of Haredim who are of Sephardic origin, who don't belong to movements, who have rebbes. So they're not Hasids. Right? There's a lot of them, the ones who wear white all the time, which apparently they do because they want to celebrate joy rather than those dismal Polish colors that they've been wearing for 300 years. But
anyone that is a devotee going back towards the Baal Shem Tov, that's a Hasid.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a Hasid. All right, so you're saying that there are people that are not part of that lineage from the Baal Shem Tov as the spiritual leader that are Haredim? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, as far as I understand it. Because don't forget, in the traditional Jewish world in Eastern Europe, even if we're forgetting about Sephardic Jews and Mizrahi Jews for a second, Hasidism split off of traditional mainstream Judaism, which did not embrace modernity as a movement. I mean, yes, eventually most of them secularized, but I think, as much as 70 to 100 years ago, you'd find a lot of these Litvish Jews, if you want to call them that, who were still traditional Jews. Their worldview was still premised on there's no distinction between the public and private sphere, and we're waiting for the Messiah to come. We just don't believe in this Rebbe bullshit, and we don't we think the Baal Shem Tov is our opponent. So I think that's largely diminished over time, but there's still some of them left, and I imagine that they are included in the category Haredim, which again is an Israeli construct. I've never heard anyone use it in the West until about 15, 20 years ago.
I do not like the term ultra-Orthodox.
It's one that I've been using since I was 5 years old because of my Schmegegge.
I know it's popular, but it's meaningless because they're not any more Orthodox than any mainstream Orthodox person.
No, there's a distinction between them and modern Orthodoxy. Modern Orthodox are people who grew out of the Enlightenment as well.
There are Orthodox people, though, that are neither modern Orthodox or Hasidic.
Yeah, and they're the traditional Orthodox that
Right.
look back to the Vilna Gaon. They look back to the Vilna Gaon as a great hero.
Yeah, those people are not they're not described as ultra Orthodox. When the word ultra Orthodox is used, it's meant to describe Hasids.
Yes, they're not described as that. They've sort of disappeared as a category, largely because their numbers have
The
disappeared.
reason they're not the problem with the term ultra Orthodox is that the doctrine, and that's what dox means, doctrine, is the same throughout all Orthodox Jews, and they're just as equally committed to it. The Hasids, however, bring in a separate spiritual set of philosophies and ideas that derive from the Baal Shem Tov, but have splintered off into a number of different directions that's spiritual and mystical and Kabbalistic, right? And that's what gives the Hasidic movement bite. So it's not that they're any more committed to this doctrine, it's that they've added to the doctrine.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, if you go back to Eastern Europe 150 years ago, you had your traditional Orthodox who rejected Hasidism, but they took a more legalistic view of Judaism, but the law was everything. They rejected modernity in terms of the Haskalah, and they saw modern Jews, whether Reform coming out of Moses Mendelssohn and Abraham Geiger, or Neo-Orthodoxy coming out of Samson Raphael Hirsch, which was, we're going to be modern in the outside world. We are Germans of the Mosaic faith, but we need to stick to more traditional aspects of Judaism when we pray and when we study, and we can't stop keeping kosher and all that stuff, but they still embraced modernity. Traditional Orthodox Jews from Eastern Europe coming out of the Vilna Gaon did not embrace modernity. Now, what happened to them in the United States? They've been overwhelmed in numbers in the traditional world by the Hasids. That's what's basically happened. So they're not a major category in the US anymore. Now, again, I don't know fully what's going on in Israel with them, but not every Haredi in Israel is a Hasid, much to what I understand.
All right. So, but what is this here that you wrote in the margin? A Shaul Magadism?
A Shaul Magidism. He's the guy who always throws out the Satmars. The Joel Teitelbaum. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I call that the classic Shaul Magidism.
Uh-huh.
All right. Next up. Okay. This is a biggie. This is going to take a few. Okay. The next two are big. Okay. In fact, Israel never solved the problems that led to its birth. Okay. Now, what he's referring to here, I won't go through the previous stuff, is he said one of the goals of Zionism, or he said the main goal of Zionism, which is wrong, because Zionism had quite a few goals, was to eliminate anti-Semitism, right? That's one of the goals of Zionism, right? And he's only hyper-focused on that one here. And starting with Leon Pinsker and then with Herzl, they believed if only we had a state like everyone else, we'd be a normal people. And then the proverbial goyim, the gefilte fish Gentiles would respect us, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're just like them with a state. Now he takes that and makes that the main goal of Zionism, and he said Israel never solved the problems that led to its birth. Now he's right about that. Israel didn't solve anti-Semitism. Of course not.
I don't think that Israel was ever intended to solve anti-Semitism.
Oh, the original doctrines, if you read Pinsker and Herzl, and even Jabotinsky to a certain extent, absolutely.
I don't think it was directly to solve. I don't think that they really believed that statehood would eliminate anti-Semitism. It was that statehood would be Jewish security against anti-Semitism, that we could fight anti-Semitism.
You might be right as far as Herzl goes, but I guarantee you that Leon Pinsker, no. He said the world has Judeophobia, and it's because we're an abnormal people. We're walking around as a ghost-like apparition, and we have failed.
Well, there is something to it that Jews are considered to be, a very different sort of people that don't fit into the societies elsewhere, and they need their own state, right? There is a lot of that.
Absolutely, I'm not denying that.
But Bartov is wrong, because I do think that that kind of anti-Semitism has been addressed with Israel. That people now respect the Jews. There are people that would not be respecting the Jews like they do today without Israel.
I don't think everyone respects us, but
I'm not saying that. It solved some anti-Semitism is what I'm saying. It may have created other anti-Semitisms, but it also solved some of them.
People certainly respect Israel for a variety of reasons, and Karp goes into that in our recording with him, absolutely. But, again, going back to the original goal of Zionism, it was also to return to our ancestral homeland, to make the desert bloom, to do all these wonderful things that we've been denied the opportunity for 2,000 years. I mean, that's what the culture of Zionists.
That has happened.
What?
The desert has bloomed. That has happened.
Revive Hebrew, do all these things. It's not just about ending anti-Semitism, but again, the normalization of the Jews. That's one of the ways I define Zionism in class. Absolutely, it's an important component. But here he goes on to say, Israel's greed for additional territory transformed it after 1967. Okay?
There was no greed for additional territory. They were attacked. They needed extra land as a buffer zone.
And the bottom line is they didn't know what was going to happen the next day with the land that they took. They were sitting with it and they said, what the hell do we do now? I mean, it was a conundrum for, quite some time. Land for peace was on the table within 5 minutes. Not all the land, for peace, but it was talked about right away.
And they gave the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. And
well, I mean, that took 10 years to happen. But yeah. Absolutely.
The point, though, is that it wasn't greed for additional territory.
Not in the least. Absolutely not. I mean, obviously, some, the more extreme nationalists see Judea and Samaria as an important intrinsic component of a Jewish state, but that's not greed for territory either. I mean, it's a wanting to take back our ancestral homeland. Whether that's okay or not, that's a different matter, right? I mean, we could debate, the ups and downs of nationalism. But again, this is just like his comment about the Gefilte, the Gentile filth, because he's reducing this to how it's imagined from a highly secular point of view, devoid of Jewish ideology, which, today is in many respects Jewish nationalism, rooted in our theology, and antiquity was all about theology. It's a Soviet construct, and it's terrible.
He is also influencing anti-Semitism by putting the Jewish majority and greed into the same sentence.
Absolutely. Bartov has done more to generate anti-Semitism, since 10/7, and with this essay in particular, than virtually anyone I know. We consider and make fun of Joshua Shanes and Sasha the Twerp all we want, but they will never carry the weight that someone like Omer Bartov does. Yeah, no, it's awful. What he's doing is dangerous as fuck, and it's a real problem.
And it's in a popular left-wing periodical.
Yeah, it's in the Nation. Yeah, is that their politics? They're far to the left?
Very far to the left.
Okay. I can't get these American magazines.
They fired Christopher Hitchens because he supported the Gulf War.
Oh, really? Huh. Yeah. Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah. So again, this is why I poured a large drink tonight. All right, so problem number 2, greed for additional territory. Having sought to provide a secure home for Jews around the world, it has become the most unsafe spot for Jews around the globe. Before 10/7, I would completely reject that characterization. I'll have to rethink it, over the span of time. But I've never felt unsafe in Israel. I don't know about you.
I fell in the shook.
Oh, didn't we talk about that?
Yeah, that's in next week's episode. But
okay,
yeah.
We're talking about next week's episode so much, we should probably stop. Okay.
Oh, all right. But
everyone, don't turn off this episode, because you're anticipating next week's. So let's
maybe with coming attractions for next week.
Attractions. The great historian Jonathan Karp.
I fell in the shook.
I fell in the shook with Adam and the historian Jonathan Karp, who didn't. Shook. Yeah, so unsafe spot around the globe. Okay, so he's trying to make it clear that Israel's unsafe. Israel is now the best excuse. Okay, Israel is now the best excuse for anti-Semites around the globe. A nation whose addiction to violence and oppression, reliance on great powers and financial clout, and constant harping on the horrors of the Holocaust as an excuse for untethered violence against the Palestinians are making even its erstwhile supporters shrink from it in discomfort, not to say horror and disgust.
I am sick and tired of Israel being accused of constantly harping on the horrors of the Holocaust as an excuse for untethered violence against Palestinians. They don't do that.
No.
They do not do that.
We Jews harp on the Holocaust, but
we harp on the Holocaust, but not for that.
Absolutely not. No, we do not do that, and I don't really know anyone who does that.
Nobody is saying we need to kill Palestinians because of what happened in the Holocaust. No one is saying that.
Well, Omer Bartov is saying we do say that.
He's saying that that's what Israel says, and that is it's a defamation. It's not anything you will ever hear from them. Now, there is a lot of discussion about the Holocaust when it comes to thinking about the threats that Israel faces from Hamas and from Palestinian terrorism. Right. It's just the point is that never again. This is the horror that happened to us in Nazi Germany, and we are not going to allow this to continue. And that the purpose of the Jewish state is to defend against this kind of persecution that could happen to us. Never again, right?
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah, he's got this whole thing wrong, and this is the sort of thing that you hear often.
But even the first part here, and that's why one of the reasons I underline this section, Israel is now the best excuse for anti-Semites. He's blaming anti-Semitism on Israel. It's victim blame, right? I mean, it's
Right.
different than saying Jews, the way you act, with your money and your financial institutions, no wonder people don't like you, or your insularity.
No, I never actually heard of this guy until I met you. So you know a lot more. I'm not a historian, right?
I haven't actually read any of his books, but okay. His important one is called The Barbarization of Warfare. And it's not exactly about the Holocaust, but it's about the brutality of Nazi soldiers and how they had to really dip into the ranks of German society because more of their professional soldiers.
But my question is, has this guy always been an anti-Zionist? Is this
I've seen his name on statements going back years, but never publicly like this. No, not at all.
Okay.
No, he's gone off the deep end, and that's why a friend of ours thinks he's on the payroll of some, foreign agents or something like that. So no, nothing like that. And he wrote what is, by all accounts, a great book on it's a microhistory of genocide in one Ukrainian town. He published it 3-4 years ago. Had it sitting in my office for a few years. I even considered assigning it in my seminar, but I never got around to reading it. In any case, I know enough about his work because any historiography book on the Holocaust, his name comes up often enough. He's that important. When you're reading something about 10 Holocaust scholars, his name will be in there. So,
all right.
So that's that. Next one we have.
And anyway, he teaches at Brown, which is the Ivy League of last resort anyway.
Is it? I always figured it was the nicest, maybe aside from Dartmouth, of the Ivy Leagues to attend. It's one of the only, I mean, if I were to name the ones I have contempt for, I don't have contempt for, didn't have contempt for Brown and Dartmouth. The other ones, absolutely. So, all right, Zionism, or at least the destructive, racist, Jewish supremacist Zionism represented by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his extremist government. That's not the problematic part. Made up of zealots okay, here we go. Made up of zealots in the mold of those who committed mass suicide in Masada, murdering their own wives and children and sending the Jews into 2,000 years of exile in the name of an insane, profoundly un-Jewish messianic faith, is equivalent to anti-Semitism. Obviously, he's
so basically
forget the is equivalent part, just the rest of it.
This Likud coalition, right? This coalition right now is basically what happened at Masada.
Yeah. Now let's for a second just entertain the idea that we're going to call this government Jewish supremacist, even though I reject the phrase. Okay, there's some bad people in Netanyahu's government. I mean, I would never, invite Ben Gvir and Smotrich to rule anything that is related to me in any way whatsoever.
I don't hate Smotrich. I'm not
Okay, but let's just assume for a sec the bad characterizations of Bibi's government are okay, are more or less accurate. Let's just take that assumption for a second. The problematic part is the history part here. Zealots in the mold of those who committed mass suicide in Masada. Now, yeah, fine. I went to a Zionist day school. We make these guys into heroes compared to those who committed suicide during the Crusades. But I ask him, what's the difference between these people and those who committed suicide during the Crusades? The difference is they were in exile. So it was okay. They weren't doing it in the name of a Jewish state. But if it has anything to do with the preservation of a Jewish state, they tried to fight back. They didn't commit suicide until they realized they weren't going to fight back. And it's ironic because, you know, the Zionists held in contempt those who committed mass suicide during the Crusades because they said they were cowards who didn't fight back. Obviously, that's a big problem in and of itself. But that's what he's basically saying about the people, you know, at Masada. They're fanatics who killed their wives and children. Again, contemporary lens here. I mean, you know, we're dealing with a world that was theologically driven in every respect. And if you think the Jews are different than anyone else in antiquity, you're nuts. Now here's the other problem here. Sending the Jews into exile in the name of an insane, profoundly un-Jewish messianic faith. So here again, he's victim blaming. He's blaming the rebels under Rome who had to endure people like Caligula and Nero. Okay, that's what's going on between the Herod, Caligula, Nero, between, you have some really colorful people back then, to put it mildly, brutes ruling over Judea between, you know, the time of Jesus and the Great Revolt. And he's actually blaming the Jews for the outcome of that war, right? Which is nuts. I mean, yeah, perhaps they could have reached accommodation with Rome, which is what actually the rabbis did afterwards. But I don't think that's really the point here. So this is ahistoricism by a professional historian of the worst variety. And this offends me more than anything else that he's written. All right, next up.
I just know Caligula and Nero from I, Claudius.
Oh yeah, I've never seen I, Claudius. But well, I mean, you know, I mean, Caligula. I remember when I was a kid, there was a movie in the theater. I must have been like 10 years old. It was called Caligula. But I remember seeing the ad in the newspaper, Montreal Gazette. And it said, Caligula, murderer, racist, insomniac. And I'm thinking, wow, you know, one of his biggest problems is that he has trouble sleeping, you know, given with everything else on the list. It was a rather curious ad at the time. All right. Oh boy, I've got a number of points here written out on this one. Oh my God. What did I put? Are these my numbers or their? No, these are their numbers, not mine. Okay. Into determined opponents, blah, blah, blah. Who's he talking about here? Anti-Semitic, as well as converting supporters of the state, even those who were once loved and who cherished it, into determined opponents in a name of precisely the same value, the same values that had led to Israel's creation: liberty, dignity for the oppressed, resistance against the oppressor, solidarity with the victims, and determined opposition to unbridled violence and the killing of innocents. He said this is the ideology that led to Israel's creation. Okay?
What do you do with it? I mean, it's just stupid.
Let's just point out here that this stands in contrast to everything else he has said about Israel in the rest of the piece. Okay? So this, which is it, Bartov? Was it the American Revolution as it's written in the document? Is it Martin Luther King, as you're saying it was? Or is it this greedy state that's trying to acquire land driven by a bunch of messianic nuts who came straight off the mountain from Masada after 2,000 years of waiting to rebuild their land-hungry, greedy, oppressive, persecutorial entity? Which is it, Bartov? I'd like to ask him that. This is an open call for Omer Bartov to come on our show and to justify this particular piece.
To do that, he blocked me and you from.
Yeah, he never accepted as a word. You know,
he blocked me. He blocked you. He blocked Moshe Bernstein. Anybody that mentions on his Twitter feed that he got the Schmegegge of the Year award from the Jewish Studies Zionist Network gets blocked.
I don't think he blocked the JSZN Twitter account, so I'll make sure to tweet this thing.
All right.
But yeah, this is pretty awful. He's basically looking at the creation of Israel as Martin Luther King, which is nuts. I mean, no, it was a Jewish national.
Look, all of these things are in the Israeli Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, but the reality is, you know, Israel was an ethno-national self-determination revolution to bring the Jews home and create a Jewish state. Yeah, it's not about freedom for the entire world, much like the ending of the movie The Ten Commandments portrays the Exodus.
Well, that's the main difference between the Israeli Declaration and the American Declaration. I even have my students try to look at what do we see as the difference in the thrust of each piece. But the Israeli version is actually much more similar to what you see in other countries than the American one.
Of course, because most countries are ethno-national states.
But it is true that the Israeli Declaration does have some discussion in it about liberty, dignity for the oppressed, and so on.
Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, it wants to be a Jewish and a democratic state. Nobody's denying that.
But this is even enshrined in the Israeli basic laws. I mean, there's basic law on human dignity and liberty, which, you know, is kind of like their Bill of Rights.
Right. Yeah. Does it say that we're not going to be greedy for land and kill innocent people?
There is nothing to that effect.
Okay. Well, there we have it. I think this is the last of the Bartov slides. So yeah, this is a really big problem, this piece, in many respects. And you know, there's so much more in it. You know, he talks about the Enlightenment and emancipation and the attempt to combat anti-Semitism. And he gets stuff wrong in there too, but it's just not worth it. I mean, what he says here is just so false and defamatory. And I would like to think any thinking person would read this and know not to take his classes, because they're not really going to learn very much if this is what he's teaching in class.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the Ivy League of last resort.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they might have a good history department. I know a few people who teach there. I might have lost respect for some.
The history department?
Hmm?
He's not in the history.
No, he is in the history department.
Oh, okay.
I know the Russian historian there. He's a good guy.
Okay.
So I haven't spoken to him in about 20 years, but I still know him. All right, people, that was step one. So go take a coffee break for a couple of minutes if you want, because we've got another piece to bash. We'll do it quickly. But
this is the intermission, you're saying?
This is the intermission.
Can we play some music, like intermission music?
We can do that. Do you have? Well, we have to worry about the YouTube copyright issue.
Oh yeah, that's the problem. Yeah.
All right, everyone, I hope you had a good intermission. I'm devoid of scotch, and that's fine. They'll survive this. We want to talk about Wokedox Professor Joshua Shaines a little bit. And this involves a piece he wrote in response to that really heartfelt and touching and disturbing statement written by Columbia, I believe Hillel students last week, talking about the trauma they have felt over the last few months, and especially since the protests began. So I'm going to open that up. We won't spend too much time on Shane's response. There are just a couple of things.
I agree, though, that Columbia letter was beautiful.
It was, and that's why we're going to show it to everyone in case they manage to miss it. So let me open that. And I want to show you, the key point is about how Josh completely mischaracterizes it and gets a number of things wrong about Zionism. But worst of all, he's writing this in response to students expressing their trauma. A heavy-handed professor, sitting in the comfort of his office, totally negating the trauma felt by Jewish students on another campus. Imagine an African-American professor doing that.
Imagine anybody doing that to the Palestinian protesters.
Yeah. Imagine a Palestinian doing that to the Palestinian protesters. Okay, that's the point here. A Palestinian Middle Eastern studies professor. And that's the evidence that Jewish studies is so whacked out at this point. All right, let's put on screen share again. All right. And we know you're all tired. We've been speaking a long time. That gefilte fish took up longer than we expected. But that's okay. You could always just take a break and finish watching later. So this is the statement from the Columbia students. It's easily Googleable. It's been talked about a lot. I encourage everyone to read the entire things. I highlighted a few important points here just to show you what this is all about, including a problematic sentence, but these guys are undergrads, and that's okay that they get some of the history or some of the interpretations of what Judaism is wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, it's fine. It's not fine for Dr. Shaines, as we will see. Okay, they talk about these people, these protesters, a lot of the Jews, Jewish peers tokenize themselves by claiming to represent real Jewish values and attempt to delegitimize our lived experiences of anti-Semitism. That's the key phrase here, right? They're talking about what they're experiencing as Jewish students on campus on a daily basis, much as African Americans in the past have expressed that, especially in spring 2020, regarding African American anti-Semitism on campus, because the violence of that summer was large, or that had preceded it was largely off campus, but they felt trauma on campus. They expressed it. Okay. And this is really great because it sort of encapsulates me too. Most of us did not choose to be political activists. We do not bang on drums and chant catchy slogans. We are average students just trying to make it through the finals, yada, yada. Those who demonize us under the cloak of anti-Zionism forced us into our activism and forced us to publicly defend our Jewish identities, which is how I got into all this stuff in the first place. When I saw how horrible many of these Jews and Jewish studies were, and I decided that something had to be done, even at the expense of my mobility within the larger Jewish studies field. We proudly believe in the Jewish people's right to self-determination in our historic home. Terrific, great. As a fundamental tenet of our Jewish identity. Totally fine. Contrary to what many have tried to sell you, no, here's the problematic part. No, Judaism cannot be separated from Israel. Zionism is simply put the manifestation of that belief. That's very simplistic. It's not necessarily, and it wasn't 100 years ago. So it's obviously what Judaism is, means different things for different people. You don't have to be a Zionist to be Jewish. You do have to recognize that Israel is the Jewish state, though, and that much like attending synagogue and keeping kosher is a component of Judaism today, so is Zionism, right? So they obviously simplify that, which is what drove Shane's nuts. Our religion.
Who cares?
That's right. Who cares? You should be focused on the first part here. And that's what the main thing is. Our religious texts are replete with references to Israel, Zion, and Jerusalem. Absolutely. But Shane's entire response is based on these two little paragraphs here.
Also, by the way, I don't think that this is even all that wrong.
It's not.
First of all, half of world Jewry lives in Israel.
Yeah.
Right? And we as Jews are absolutely supposed to care about our nation of Israel, whether we actually have a state or not, correct? Right?
Yes, but I know what the wokeadox response is to all that. I could totally mouth it, and I can anticipate it, and I've done it, before with people on Facebook. I did it in our next podcast. I know what the buts and howevers coming from these people will be about that.
What is it? Just tell me, what is it?
We're going to read Shane's thing, and we'll see.
All right. Okay.
So here, many of us are not religiously observant, yet Zionism remains a pillar of our Jewish identity. Perfect. That's exactly. I mean, that sort of characterizes Zionism, for me too. Right? It's how I identify as being Jewish, right? We connect to Israel not only to our ancestral homeland, but as the only place in the modern world where Jews can safely take ownership of their destiny, which is the principle of Zionism. Yes, Israel has problems and it's not perfect or whatever else. And like any other government, no, the people don't control what goes on in the government. But that's not the point here. The only part that's problematic in this entire piece, and they're undergrads, this could be forgiven. Judaism cannot be separated from Israel. Of course it can. Zionism, as from Israel to states. Zionism is simply put the manifestation of that belief. Okay, there's issues with that. But the thing we should be focused on is them speaking out here about the anti-Semitism that they have endured. This is in stark contrast to the statement issued by UCLA Jewish students, which was an apologetic to the anti-Semites, condemning the, quote, Zionists who trampled onto campus and committed the alleged violence. So that statement's a whole other, can of worms that we're not going to get into. But this is what the Columbia Jewish students said. We know what they think. Perfect. Shane's response. Now, we're not going to go through this entire thing, but I just want to highlight, the title says on pluralism and the difference between religious identity and the state. Okay. Our response to Columbia's Hillel students. The difference between a religious identity and a state. So Shane's is going all the way in the opposite direction and claiming that Israel is not really a component of having a religious Jewish identity, which is nuts, right? Or a Jewish identity, period. It's two separate things, which is not true in practice, even though there's some Jews who don't identify with Israel. They list slogans recited by some protesters that cross lines and anti-Semitism and rightly call them out. Okay, so he's saying he's commending their statements at first. That letter demonstrates maturity and confidence, and the students should be applauded for speaking up. Obviously, he's going to say that before he starts bashing them. That said, there are some problems with their assumption about Judaism and Zionism, both historically and in terms of understanding contemporary Judaism, that warrant further conversation. Zionism, like all modern Jewish political movements, began self-consciously as a rebellion against rabbinic Judaism. No, that's not true. Zionism did not rebel against rabbinic Judaism, right? You agree with me?
Some manifestations of it did, yes.
I mean, it really began as a response to the failure of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment promised freedom for the Jews. Freedoms and liberties within a European framework of nation states.
I don't think it's a response to the failure of the Enlightenment. I think it's a project of the Enlightenment.
Well, everything that's a response to the Enlightenment, because it's a failure, is also part of the Enlightenment. I mean, Marxism is a response to the Enlightenment, and it's also part of the Enlightenment. So yeah, everything that comes after the Enlightenment is in some way a response to the Enlightenment.
Yeah, all right, fine.
Even Nazism is part of the Enlightenment in certain ways, even though it claims to reject the Enlightenment, but we're not going to go there. Now, Shane's training is on Austrian Galicia, that very small chunk of Poland where Krakow is, that was annexed by Austria. So it's possible that the Zionism that he studied over there is the case, but that totally neglects not only German Zionism, but more importantly, the Zionism of Eastern Europe and Russia. Now, what they were responding to was Tsarist oppression. They came out of the Pale of Settlement. They were oppressed by the Tsars. They saw all these radical ideologies emerging, Marxism, Bolshevism, Menshevism, Bundism, Polish nationalism, Ukrainian nationalism. Zionism comes into that milieu. It has nothing to do with the rabbis, except for the rabbis who condemned Zionism, and there were many who did, but that's not why it emerged whatsoever. But he needs this for this piece. He needs to say it has to do with rabbinic Judaism because he has to view Zionism as a religion, which is what he does. In other words, these students are conflating a type of Judaism, today a popular one, with all Judaism, the same way as other denominations and Jewish political movements too often assume that the past and its text proves that their version of Judaism is Judaism and the others are inauthentic fakes. Is that what you got out of the piece from Columbia?
Not at all.
Yeah, that's absurd. He's taking that one line where they say that Zionism is Judaism today. And again, undergrads, let's forgive them here, and that's not the gist of the piece. I would urge them to consider and both value and reality, the reality of pluralism. I don't see where they rejected pluralism. They rejected anti-Semites, and especially the Jews who condemn Zionism. I don't see why the anti-Zionists who are chanting Palestine will be free from the river to the sea should be considered a pluralistic view of Judaism, because it's not, right? It's awful.
On one hand, these anti-Zionists claim that the Jews en masse are brainwashing each other and their youth in particular into supporting Israel, and then in the next breath they claim that it's not Judaism. It's not the way. It doesn't have to. It isn't how Jewry is supposed.
Wait, when you say they, are you talking about the Josh?
I'm talking about anti-Zionists in particular.
Oh, okay, because he's not a they, he's a he, as far as I know.
No, I understand. That's not my point. I'm not. That's not the issue here. I'm saying that he's a representative of this anti-Zionist movement, right?
From a religious perspective, he's a wokeodox.
From a religious perspective, yeah. But I mean, would he agree that? I mean, it's true that lots of Jewish schools are teaching a love for Israel. That Jewish synagogues are talking about Israel.
Well, this is the Israelism film line. I mean, that's what he's basically giving here, but he's putting more of a religious spin on it. I mean, that's basically it.
Yeah, but it goes against the thesis of that film, right? What he's saying here.
How so?
Because the thesis of that's my point. The thesis of that film is that Judaism has become Zionism, right? If you look at the way that Jewish institutions behave, right? Now he's saying it's not, Judaism is not Zionism. So which is it?
Well, I haven't seen the film, but based on everything I've watched and read about it, including the trailer, the film is saying, this is what Judaism has become, and that's not a good thing. Okay, so he's saying that
he's not saying that it's not a good thing. He's saying it doesn't exist. That's what he's saying here. He's saying that Judaism is not Zionism. He's not even making a judgment about whether or not it's a good thing. He's simply saying that it's not Zionism, that the authors of that Columbia piece are wrong. Judaism does not directly overlap with Zionism.
Well, I think he's sort of saying that it can. And they have to be pluralistic and accept that it's not, for everyone. But then you're right, the difference between a religious identity and a political state, okay, which is a problem, okay? Because yes, Zionism is nationalism is the religion of modernity. I mean, that's been said by, dozens of scholars a million times over, and in many ways it is. But no, I don't think I think there's a major overlap between, first of all, Jewish identity is not a religious identity, and we know that already. So I don't even know why he's reducing it to a religious identity. He's not. He shouldn't. He knows better. But it's because of their one sentence where they said Judaism is Zionism. That's what he's, harping on here, and he's running with it. He's being wrong here, absolutely. Because he does say up here that, Zionism is a stream of Judaism, and they need to know it's not the only one. And here he's saying that it's not a valid religious stream. So you're right about that. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. It makes no sense. In other words, just because their religious identity, the way they read their tradition and history, tells them that they need to create a state in a certain way, does not necessarily mean that state in a form is automatically legitimate or uncontestable. What is the UN's recognition of Zionism? Of Israel as an independent state?
Wait. There is nothing in Jewish religious identity that tells anyone that they need to create a state in a certain way. There's a lot of different variants of Zionism and how the state should be conceived, and none of it is even religious in basis. I mean, if you're going to talk about a religious Jewish state, you're talking about a non-democratic state. You're talking about the state that in Deuteronomy, in Devarim, is prescribed by God directly as the constitution for the kingdom of Israel. And that is not what the modern state of Israel is using. So because no modern Zionist wants to, use that particular model yet, I mean, maybe eventually when the Mashiach arrives, but not at this point, we're left with a modern state. So Zionism has been, in many respects, a debate between different thinkers on how to construct a state.
He sort of recognizes that before, saying Kahanism, for example, is also a form of Judaism. Smotrich has ample proof texts to defend his call for genocide last week. So
Smotrich did not call for genocide last week.
I don't even know what he's talking about. So
I don't know what he's talking about. I don't know.
Yeah. No, nobody called for genocide. Thank you, Bartov. Saying you want to turn Gaza into a parking lot the day after 10/7 is not calling for genocide. It's a normal reaction to
right. But also, by the way, we don't have to get in. We don't have a lot of time left. But
yeah,
they have basically changed the definition of genocide. Scholars, left-wing scholars, and even some left-wing people in the international legal profession have changed the meaning of the word genocide. It no longer, at least according to them, it no longer means an event of mass extinction that's imposed by various people working in concert with one another to do that. Now it means an ongoing process in which the end result could eventually, at some point, maybe, lead to the extermination of a single ethnic group. That's what genocide now means.
Well, this comes out of postmodernism, which sort of reduced the idea of, agency and historical causality. Obviously, they would still blame, the Zionists for the long-term process, but, they're looking at wider structures and the diffusion of discourse and practices that come out of that discourse. Excuse my French for speaking in postmodern jargon. I don't like doing that. But I mean, yeah, that's where they're coming from, except they imposed a social justice element to it that was not there in the original postmodern.
Fine, use other words. Like, why co-opt the word genocide? Why change the meaning? The only reason why they've done it, I tell you, I can answer my own question. The reason they did this is so that they can call Israel's actions a genocide, so that they could describe Israel's actions in the most heinous terminology possible, right?
Well, that goes, I mean, that's why they call it an apartheid state. I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah, they have to use a word that describes Jews as doing the worst possible thing.
It's emotive rather than analytical, and we have this in our damn mission statement for JSZN. We did this. It's point number 2, I think, where we reject this.
Right.
Yeah,
And
thank
they
you for swearing so much tonight. It's just I'm
and
really
they but the
infuriated.
scholars that do
I've
this,
also realized that some of my colleagues are not very smart. But
the,
anyways,
the scholars that do this claim that they're doing it for better analysis, for the purposes of creating a better framework for analysis. And that is bogus.
of course it's bogus.
For a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons it's bogus is because now you're no longer left with a word for what an actual genocide is. What do you
Yeah.
call the Holocaust then? What do you
What do you call what?
what do you call that?
Which?
If a genocide is no longer an event of extinction or you know an intended extinction, a mass extermination of a people, well, then what is the Holocaust? Is there a word left?
White on white crime.
Well, that's what Whoopi Goldberg said.
Well, that's a woke opinion. I mean, it's not.
It's
I heard it long before Whoopi Goldberg said it.
man's inhumanity to man. All right.
So, but we could do an episode one day, and we'll pull up the original definition of genocide by Lemkin, and we'll see that the actual original definition is very problematic too. I mean, it's very ambiguous. So it's.
But it's a lot better than this one.
Well, this is idiocy. I mean, there's nothing else to it. In any case, in sum, I urge us all to remember 2 points. One, we should respect the reality of pluralism with a healthy dose of religious humility. Is that how you characterize the protesters? People who respect the reality of pluralism with a healthy dose of religious humility?
It's nuts.
These people wearing keffiyehs and refusing to show their faces and, screaming Palestine will be free, intifada, forever globally.
It's nuts.
Yeah, that's absolutely nuts. 2, oh, he even has it in 2A and 2B. It's very organized. If you are protesting a state, do not conflate it with the religious or ethnic group connected to it. Forget religion for a second. Why wouldn't you conflate it with the ethnic group? Maybe conflate's too strong a word, but obviously they're connected. It's the ethno-national Jewish state built in their ancestral homeland, now populated by half of the world's Jewish population, speaking our language of antiquity. It makes no sense. It's so wrong. You might reject it, but that doesn't mean it's not true or accurate. If someone is careful to do this, those defending the state should acknowledge this fact and understand it, therefore, is not a religious attack. Nobody's attacking Judaism in these protests. They're not. They're trying to make these people feel unsafe for being Jews and for perhaps supporting the state of Israel. These are some complex conversations. I hope they are open to them. So he's pulling a Michal Raucher here, who we've discussed in our podcast before, who wrote that piece saying anti-Semitism is sensationalized at Rutgers, no less. And she's calling on her students to be curious and go, talk to the other people on the other side. So Shanes is doing that as well. So he wants these people at Columbia, the Jewish students from Hillel, to go and say, hey, this is our identity. Can we have a conversation? We believe that our religion or our ethnic identity is intrinsically linked to a Jewish state. Can we sit down and talk about it for a few minutes? How are they going to respond?
No,
he lives in a fantasy world.
They're living, it's on another planet as well.
And worse, he's endangering students. If he actually tells students to go do this, he's committing, fine, they're not on his campus. I suppose there's nothing in his rules as a professor that prevents him from endangering people on another campus. But still, it's so irresponsible.
He's living on a different planet. Is Charleston on our planet?
Charleston is just south of me. And he never invited me to give a talk there, even when we were friends. I guess it's on our planet. No, it's not. It's ridiculous. And there's no anti-Semitism problem on his planet, though I can't imagine what's going on in their Jewish studies program. It can't be good. They've got a big Jewish studies program, and he basically runs it. But there's no anti-Semitism. It's Trump country, so there's no anti-Semitism on their campus. Much as there isn't really where I am, and in most of the North Carolina campuses. So he's not at Columbia. He doesn't have the right to say this. And no professor should even be writing a response to students. I find it very unethical to do that, especially Hillel students.
Well, they put the statement out as a public statement.
I guess so, but I don't know. I would never feel comfortable doing it. I absolutely wouldn't.
I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Well, then again, we did respond to the CUNY Law School graduation speech.
Yeah.
Okay, I take that back, I guess. He has no business saying this to his fellow Jews. I'm going to stick with something.
All right.
Yeah. He's
All right, well,
he's endangering people. That's what I'm saying.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
okay. So that's it then. I
Yeah,
guess.
we're done. This was a very long episode. I hope you I guess probably an hour and 15 minutes, but that's fine.
Moral of the story is go out and buy some gefilte fish and have
Yeah.
gefilte fish.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the gefilte fish routine. Adam and I are taking it on the road very soon. We're going to do a presentation, Gentile Filth or Gefilte Fish, a tribute to Omer Bartov and company.
Yeah, that might be the title for this episode.
I think that's a good title. Yeah. Okay, awesome. We came up with a title.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone. And I'm sure you're excited to see our next episode with Professor Jonathan Karp, since we talked about that for half the time tonight.
Another fish, carp.
I see a running theme here. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's too bad we can't bring him back. Well, we'll bring him back to discuss gefilte fish another time.
All right, sounds
He'll be
good.
okay with that. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.